want to pick up from where we left off, speaking a bit about Foucault, Agamben, and biopolitics. Agamben finishes with this idea that inherent in the concept of our modern form of government, democracy, is a seed, a totalitarian seed that we see rolling out around us each and every day. And his metaphor is the camp. Some see it and some do not. But we are all, in one way or another, part of this camp that is the modern political structure. So let me go into this a little bit more. I wrote down a few ideas of my own regarding this. Before I begin, sometimes it's helpful to have a little balance. And as we're weighing out ideas of men, philosophers, this scripture jumped at me. And I do that to open up, to help remind some of us, wherever we're at with our own worldview, is that I feel the eschatology of the dominant oligarchical class stands consciously in opposition to that. It is a Gnostic philosophy, meaning that it does not lead its way through revealed scriptures, but rather through the wisdom of men. So I just want us to be aware that there's a balancing between two worldviews that I believe is going on, at least in the cosmic sense of things. So again, in light of Foucault and Agamben, the prophets of the 20th century promised us a global village, governed by the rule of law, illuminated with 1,000 points of light. Instead, we find ourselves inside a global internment camp with increasingly fewer civil rights, God-given rights, and only a panopticon of light to guide our way. Behind that light, an illuminated yet shadowy figure. Inside yet outside the camp, the sovereign decides our fate, at least our earthly fate. Insights we found unacceptable, we are forced to accept. The high priests, the adepts, the planners, the builders, those geostrategists of the last century understood all too well that the camp was the inevitable outcome of modern politics. Predicated as it was upon the state of nature fiction. Please see Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Only in hindsight do we accept that the brute impulses which abound in that state of nature, as Thomas Hobbes would say, that war of all against all, where one must be a villain in order not to be a victim, where life is nasty, short, and brutish, if we do not give a substantial, if not all, of our natural God-given rights over to this sovereign, be he a visible or invisible force. Only in the hindsight do we accept that the brute impulses which abound in that state of nature were to be tamed through this covenant of peace, this exchanging of our God-given rights to the sovereign, and ordered by an absolute, now we discover, shadowy figure, the deep state. Only in hindsight do we accept that the prophets, too, of the last century were merely invoking Plato's noble lie. That myth used to communicate the inversion of truth in order to serve the ideal communist or fascist state. John McMurtry, I've cited him before, the famed Canadian scholar, notes in this case the noble lie was a Talmudic inversion, not unlike what Foucault discussed, the transition from kingship to democracy, that drove the ideal fascist covert state and its public intellectuals through a prism of US global money power party rule a la Strauss, see Chicago University, to keep the vulgar herd, the unwashed masses, the goyim, the people themselves ignorant and obedient. McMurtry continues. Via Strauss, of course, he is the pinup person for the neoconservative movement and a protege of the Nazi Carl Schmitt. Via Strauss in the US covert state, this became the right of might, and the ultimate natural law is limitless private capital, power, and empire with no end of totalization. Across peoples, lands of the world, Hegel too. Remember, we have the Kant, the biopolitical piece of that peanut butter jelly sandwich. Hegel, the esoteric jelly that are going to come together. Hegel too suits a fascist, capitalist reading since he argues the state is the march of God through the world, end quote. And war itself is history's test of which state is the higher realization of the absolute truth. Might makes right in this achemical formulation of history. Smash, smash, outcome, thesis, antithesis, until we have the singularity. Giorgio Agamben also notes an inner solidarity, as we discussed before, between democracy and totalitarianism. For Agamben, the concentration camp comes to define the biopolitical paradigm of the West. Many consider the Italian philosopher's 1990 insights too highly provocative. Others consider him off the reservation entirely. However, it is increasingly difficult to reject as a condition of modern life a permanent state of exception where the deep state can transition to the proper state in times of imminent danger or fear. Agamben again says we are living in a permanent state of exception. The deep state is the state. Agamben says the deep state, yes, indeed, is calling the shots. And how do they function when they call the shots? Who gets to define who is friend and who is foe? The deep state. And their job, according to Agamben and Foucault, is to rid the body politics of the cancer. They get to decide what is the cancer. They also get to decide with functional mechanisms and apparatuses ordered to reduce human beings, that is the body, mind and soul of man, these dark, shadowy figures inside yet outside the camp get to decide who gets to be reduced to bare life, who therefore can be seen as nothing but a beast and must live outside the law like a medieval wolf or wolfman. As the paradigm of modern government, consider the constitutional provisions, said Agamben, allowing for states of emergencies that were highly effectively globalized in the 20th century. At least 147 countries had something of the sort in 1996. Numbers much higher now. Agamben's next text, State of Exception, addresses the war on terror when speaking about the military order issued by George Bush on November 13th, 2001. Agamben writes, "What is new about President Bush's order is that it radically erases any legal status of the individual, the foundation of modern constitutional government. Erased, thus producing a legally unnameable and unclassified being, a wolfman, no longer in civil society, but in the camp. Not only do the Taliban that were captured in Afghanistan not enjoy the status of PWOs or prisoners of war, as defined by the Geneva Convention, they do not even have the status of people charged with a crime, according to American laws. Many of the individuals captured in Afghanistan, again, this is Agamben, were taken to be held at Guantanamo Bay without trial. These individuals were termed as enemy combatants until 7 July 2006. These individuals had been treated outside the Geneva Convention. But again, the paradigm that Agamben's speaking of is it's going to go from them to where we have it now, that terrorism can be not only foreign but domestic, so we don't have to take it to them before they're here, because it in fact is here, and we are all suspects first and citizens, however defined, second. And increasingly, we're seeing Americans that are now hovering between a world of civil rights and the camp, and whether or not FEMA, so-called, will be the Guantanamo Bay of what used to be law-abiding American citizens is yet to be seen.